Wow. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Spoken word poetry saved my life, and I am only alive today because this art form is designed for people to tell their truth and heal. In 2012, I was living in the Bay Area in California. I had gone there to find more people like me, other queers, other artists, but I underestimated the emotional repercussions of such a substantial change, and because for the entirety of my life I lacked mental health resources like peer support groups, I turned to substance abuse. In 4 months' time, I lost nearly 80 pounds. I was doing a lot of drugs. The experience was a culmination of all the things I'd always sought: acceptance, visibility, and approval. Drugs are consistent. They're gratifying. They made me feel in control because they erased my self-consciousness and my fear. They made me forget to examine my pain by giving me something to do with it. But this wasn't the first time I had coped through drug use. I have a big story to tell, one that extends much further back than being in a big city as an adult and being scared. The truth is that I'm one of the lucky ones because I made it out alive. The first time I kissed a girl, I was 6 years old. 2 years later, I endured sexual assault for the first time. And a couple of years after that, in the bathroom of an elementary school, I got high for the first time. I was reacting to my environment by trying to displace feelings I didn't yet have language for. I didn't like boys. I didn't understand what my body was for. I didn't want the ever-present sexual attention. Boys will be boys was a very resounding message in my life. I grew up in an America where we don't talk about mental health or trauma, much less healing. I come from a background of poverty, sexual assault, domestic violence, generational trauma, normalized abusive behaviors, and prescription addiction. So, being an artist was a hobby at best. Being gay was considered a choice. By 16, I wasn't welcome in my home or my church. I wasn't accepted by many of my peers or their parents, and I was looked upon with disgust when I attended prom with my first girlfriend. This mass degradation of my character cultivated a deep shame in me, one I learned to silence with substances. Time and time again, I have been what is the statistical norm for most lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning people in the modern day. For most of my life, I have lived in small rural towns where my sexual orientation was exploited behind closed doors. I often received the message that I was the only one like me. I think the greatest tragedy in all of this is how many years I spent feeling like I was alone. Like these experiences were the results of my actions and thereby my fault. For years, no one talked to me about being a lesbian in a healthy way. For years, I didn't know there were so many other people like me out there struggling to find resources for sexual education, orientation and gender affirmation, and trauma therapy. In a 2016 Gallup poll, it is reported that there are 10 million Americans and approximately 4% of them now identify as LGBTQ. The Human Rights Campaign reported that, we'll go with it. The Human Rights Campaign reports that we are approximately 8 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 6 times more likely to report high levels of depression, and 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs and be at risk for STDs and HIV. There is ample evidence to suggest that this societal prejudice causes significant medical, psychological, and other harms to LGBTQ people. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has reported that we are 3 times more likely to experience a mental health condition such as generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, PTSD, and thoughts of suicide or substance abuse, all of which are related to perceived, potential, or actual discrimination. We must confront stigma and prejudice that other people don't have to face while also dealing with the societal bias against mental health conditions. Many of us report having to hide our sexuality and our sexual orientation from those in the mental health system for fear of being rejected and ridiculed, which is what happened to me. I saw many therapists in my early teens and early 20s, and I can't tell you how many of them told me that not only would I grow out of being a lesbian, that this was very much a phase. It was so much a phase that they diagnosed me, incorrectly so, with bipolar II disorder. It took me 16 years to have that diagnosis overturned to what is the correct diagnosis, PTSD. The overlap on those symptoms is extraordinary, but without trauma-informed health care, it is often doled out to us in the form of a cocktail of prescriptions rather than healing talk therapy. For LGBTQ people ages 10 to 24, suicide is one of the leading causes of death, specifically attributed to a lack of peer support networks. Approximately 25% of the LGBTQ population abuses substances and alcohol, compared to 10% of our heterosexual counterparts. These are devastating numbers, not only because I lived them, but because others are still living them every single day. And this is where poetry comes in. In 2012, I walked into the Berkeley Poetry Slam, and my life changed forever. The host that night said words I will never forget. He said, "This is a church for people who don't have one." I knew in that moment that everything I had understood about life would change. A little history about slam poetry. Started in 1986 in Chicago to get people interested in a seemingly archaic art form again. You are allowed to participate. That started here. Today, slam poetry spans multiple continents, innumerable languages. It's popping up in high schools all over the country. In a poetry slam, you have about 2 hours, 3 rounds, 3 minutes, 10 seconds, and 5 randomly chosen judges from the audience who score a poet's poem from 1 to 10. 1 is the worst thing you have ever heard in your life. Wrap it up. Nobody wants to hear this anymore. 10 is a religious conversion. 10 changed your life just by being present for it. Oftentimes, poets are rewarded with bragging rights. They're rewarded with opportunities to compete at national events, such as those hosted by Poetry Slam Incorporated. Despite competition being infused with an art form, we have a saying. The point is neither the points nor the poetry. The point is the people. What matters is the community, the inclusive, embracing, empathetic, no-holds-barred love that projects in every single direction. People from all walks of life gather to tell their truths, and the only expectation of anyone in the room is that we honor each other. And this is where I broke my silence. I moved back to the Midwest in 2013, and in 2014 I founded Kansas City Poetry Slam for many reasons, but mainly because the love and acceptance I'd received on the California Slam team and Slam community had been life-altering, and I couldn't live without it. I made amends with my parents because of slam poetry. I got sober because of slam poetry. It was an extraordinary, life-changing experience, and I wanted to share that with other people. So just like my California mentors, I kicked off the slam in 2014 with an incredible group of people in Kansas City. And since then, I've been receiving every type of person with open arms and an open heart. I have sat with people while they have cried, telling their stories of their rapes, their abortions, their miscarriages, and every single time they have had to call the police on their spouses and their siblings and their parents. Both on stage and off, we strangers talk about our stints in rehab and psychiatric wards, medication pros and cons, the friends we've lost to suicide, surviving human trafficking, the lack of mental health resources in this country, and what it's like to spend your holidays alone, sleeping behind a dumpster or in a shelter. We celebrate our poverty, and we celebrate our paydays over potluck meals. We gather in bars, in libraries, in community centers, coffee shops, parks, and on city sidewalks. You can find us just about anywhere because we are, in fact, everywhere. We are holed up in our cubicles. We are CEOs, and we are experiencing homelessness. We are overnight manual labor, and we are academics. We are profound thinkers and feelers. We are activists and pacifists. We are agitators. We are human beings. Spoken word poetry saved my life because it was the first form of a peer support network that I encountered. It was inadvertently the first community experience I'd had in which I could tell my truth and no one tried to fix me. No one tried to tell me to feel differently. No one told me to get over it, suppress it, act like whatever it is didn't happen. And I told you, I, as many of us, grew up in an America that shames us into a violent silence. And then, decades later, I was lucky enough to have someone hand me a microphone and say, let it out. Few know this better than me, that in this country, the ambition of modern psychotherapy is exploring your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors with the goal of improving your well-being. Now, imagine if you can for a moment, for the grand price of maybe $5, that you can walk into an environment where it's just you and your peers. Everyone has a story. Everyone needs a hero. Everyone is a hero. Here, in this place, everyone's in it together. We unite for good and for growth, for healing. Slams are community-sustained safe places. They are the birthplaces of personal revelation and social revolution. I believe personally that modern society is desperate for the need to connect to one another. We are all in need of an outlet from the pressures and an oasis from the pace and cruelty and facelessness of modern life. We need time to reflect and ask ourselves what it is we want and need. I believe that art and poetry and their overlap have the power to save lives. I believe this because I've experienced it time and time again over the last 5 years. Poetry slam environments mirror peer support programs, which, in their full and healthiest intention, teach skills and offer support to help people experiencing mental health challenges lead meaningful lives in their community. Peer specialists promote recovery, enhance hope, and develop social networking. Often I have encountered peer support groups that are staffed by a few volunteers whose dedication to their experience is so tremendous that they will give every free hour they can to be that person that you call at 2 o'clock in the morning. They answer the hotlines, they are your sponsor, they are extraordinary, empathetic, selfless human beings who know what it's like to be alone and they don't want anybody else to ever go through that. Peer support environment's primary contribution is empathy. Organizations and corporations across the country have implemented peer support networks, including the US government. The Department of Veterans Affairs has as many peer support networks now as it does other therapy. They're incredibly vital and incredibly helpful for healing. The reality is that when you pay a cover at an art event like a slam poetry experience, you are doing the same thing. You are facilitating, which comes from the Latin word facilis, the act of making something easier. Being there, showing your support and your sincerity and your human experience makes this possible. We all come together as a community and nobody's alone anymore. In my work and in the work of other people holding space by facilitating peer support groups, we make room not only for ourselves but for other people to survive their sufferings. We heal from them too. We heal so beautifully. Since 2012, spoken word poetry has given me a 7-page resume of performances. I have performed from coast to coast. I am sober. I am in love. I am happy. I am healthy. I see a future when I look in the mirror, and I never knew this kind of peace before poetry. These days, it's how I cope with everything. This piece is called owned. I think my parents were distressed that I was gay because heterosexuality was the last strand of something in common between us. When they realized that their oldest baby girl would be dining on women for the rest of her life, they did what any normal, loving, church-manipulated redneck Americans would do. They disowned me. Now, to disown implies ownership, which by all dry, drunk, submissive role, head of household, master of ceremonies, BS, was entirely true. I was owned, bought and sold into a slavery of conservative womanhood as if reincarnated to learn the real truth. But now that I am grown, owned by no one, I still walk quickly down these dark alleyways as this excess of X chromosomes has left me with a handicap of femininity. Despite that when I spit these words, they're thicker than blood and stronger than venom. And when I spit these words, it is always in protest of the minimum I dare anyone in here. To Martin Luther King yourself to the stage, Harvey Milk your way to a podium, and stop sending your love notes on your iPhones. Put a pen to a page. Put a pen to a page. Like every server in this world may one day crash, and what you have to say matters. Because what you have to say matters. So write it down, carry it on your back, and pray it never gets caught in a house fire. And for far too long now, I personally have romanticized the way poets grip fist around neck of cheap wine bottle to choke the oxygen out of the fire of our creative selves, but no longer. No longer. Me, I want to be an animated storyteller with that reggae swag and a Maya Angelou hymn in my throat, carrying the confidence of heritage and eons of oppression overturned. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm just a white girl with a bruising tail, daring you to dare me to dare myself to succeed, and I exist here on this stage to dare you to dare yourselves to do the same. So I appreciate you listening to these last 10 minutes, which poorly explained 9 bad relationships, which ate away the very potential 7 shrinks never suggested I had. I spent 6 years as a part-time student acquiring 5 figures in debt, 4 going degrees at 3 different universities, too small to cultivate my one aspiration: to live out loud, infinitely, as a poet. Thank you all so much.